News Talk 1110 and 99.3 FM WBT. Keith Larson gratefully plugging away for another 24 hours.
We're having fun. We're poking at the people who are in charge, who's ever in charge, and asking questions and making a little trouble for authority and that sort of thing, and talking out with and hanging out with some folks. I tell people it's good work for a former class clown. What the research turns up on my show, like some others, is most people, the big chunk of people who absolutely love me and what I do. But there's a chunk of people who absolutely hate me and what I do. But that's because of saying something that gets to somebody. Now, I don't say a certain thing or make something up like just in a way to falsely or artificially be provocative. We don't do things like that, right. But it's what we do, the subject matter, the poking around at people, and sometimes the having fun, the way that we do it, to just sort of have fun with something, make a little bit of fun of it as a way to making a point. So yeah, that hacks people off. We have a saying, when people get hacked off, if it gets under their skin, we say, oh well.
When I first got here, we didn't have phone screeners, we ran our own boards, which I really miss, because I liked doing radio. So it was a deal where I used to say, you know, you get in, you get on. In other words, if you called and you didn't get a busy signal and you were willing to sit there long enough, you were going to get in. It was great training because you never knew what was coming. There was no board like we've got there telling me what's next. You just said, hey, Jim, you're on the air, and then all of a sudden Jim either teed off on you or did something. But it taught you how to... you got to watch, you know, some of these people are smarter than you are. Sure. Yeah. And so when they walk you into a corner, you got to figure out kind of a nice way to dance your way out without looking like too big an idiot. And every now and then you look like a big idiot, but that's part of the sport of it all, I guess.
There's one really broad, common theme to a lot of other things that go on in Charlotte, and that has to do with, you know, what I call the uptown crowd, the powers that be, and sort of a historical way that Charlotte has had where a few people, a few businesses really dictate their vision of what's going to be to everyone else. And people just sort of are used to having gone along. And in the last several years, as people like myself and some others, John, in Charlotte have asked questions and made some trouble for these people, these leaders, in what it is they want to turn Charlotte into, their little version of playing Sim City, as I call it. That's been the source of a lot of conversation and a lot of angst for political leaders. Charlotte has historically rather try to not let anybody know that we've got a major gang problem and a major crime problem here. So it's gangs and crimes that are the issue, but that's still, in a way, a big part of this overarching, what it comes down to is Charlotte and the business entities and the powers that be trying to keep it tidy, seem rather than be, put positive spin on things. So that's really the overarching big issue in Charlotte, and then trains and crime and gangs and all of these other things happen as a result of that.
We pride ourselves on being local, and I don't, Clear Channel, as you're reading about Clear Channel and their financial problems right now, they're going more syndicated. We have always been dedicated to more local. Frustration comes in that I think journalism, to some extent, has lost just the foundation. It's not always rocket science. Who, what, where, why, and when. Yep. And so if you don't go in to report a story with that still as your foundation, then I'm not so sure that you're doing your job. So now we have people that are either in the business to try to promote their own agenda, or feel that their opinion's more important than presenting an unbiased source of news. But where do you go now and find an unbiased source of news? I think it's virtually impossible. If you started to try to create that same balance everywhere else, then all of a sudden you are government-controlled voice. And we're telling NPR what they have to be, and we're telling the New York Times what they have to be, and we're telling... So if the New York Times wants to be primarily a left-writing newspaper, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. I guess the problem I have is not necessarily knowing when you're reading something whether or not it's fact or slightly fiction. And I just think it's hard. With all the information sources we have today, it's really hard to get information. Isn't that ironic?
Well, there are several correct and real answers to your questions about the fairness doctrine. And they might seem somewhat conflicting, but I'll tell you what they are. Number one, it's a real issue, it's a real concern, sure. because it's bad business. It's a thought from an earlier era of how to try to manage content by government, and it's not good, and it's also not necessary. There's no shortage of voices and outlets for people to be heard. So it is a very real concern, and when you refer to localism or some of these other ways that they may try to go about the same end result of a fairness doctrine, it's because they know fairness doctrine, quote unquote, well, that would shut down, that might shut down some conservative talk radio. That would also shut down Air America, progressive radio. It would shut down, quote unquote, or impact any ideology. So when they talk localism, what that's really doing is trying to attack syndicated programming like Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and clamp down on them not through the fairness, but by saying a certain amount of programming has to be local. So those are very real concerns, and fairness doctrine, localism is bad business. Now, having said that, I don't believe that WBT is as susceptible as some other stations are, because most of WBT's programming is local, is live. I have as many guests who quote-unquote agree with me as who don't, so I'm not personally concerned about that, because I do more than just a one-sided monologue on a political ideology. So I'm not personally worried about it, but it is a very real concern, and it's an attempt by government and some to control thought and expression and conversation, and it's not good.
I'm a master of nothing, but an apprentice of everything. And quite frankly, that's why I think this medium works for me, is because it lets me go all over the place. I have a variety of interests, and I get to pretty much do whatever I want to with them here. So if it interests me, that's what we do. And sooner or later, if what interests me doesn't interest everybody else, my ratings will show it and they'll get rid of me. And then I'll go do whatever it is I do next. What happened to Joe, who was going to call me an old hippie? Nobody's ever called me that before. Rodney, you're on News Talk 1110 WBT.
I got to tell you, it's like Ferris Bueller said, it is so choice. I highly recommend picking one up if you have the means. A radio gig is pretty good.